see some new faces. I love to just explain why this is my favorite time of the gathering. I really need to, with a few new folks in the room. The Life Change Story, also known as a testimony, is a time where, as a faith community, every week when we gather, we hear from one of you. This is just important. Not very many church services devote time in a very tightly packed and scheduled worship service for this type of thing. We think it's as important, if not the most important part of our gathering. So I want to, at this time, invite Laura Brandt. She's one of the leaders in the church. She's on the executive drive team and doing some amazing stuff. In the name of Jesus, she's running away. You're going the wrong direction, Laura. Okay, no, she's getting a chair. All right. And Laura's going to just speak from her heart tonight and share some of what God is doing to change her life. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Laura.
Hi, Laura. I had not planned on doing this, but I think it was meant to be. The songs tonight were 3 songs that were extremely meaningful for me, 3 of my favorites, and they just sort of really work into what I wanted to talk about anyway. I lived in St. Louis most of my life. I moved here to Springfield about 2.5 years ago, and I was a middle school teacher for 30 years. So just so you know a little bit about me. One thing I want to say right off is that one thing I've learned here at Church at the Center is that you don't have to come from the same walks of life or backgrounds in life to learn from each other. And so I hope that even though my background, my story may be different from that of you or your family or your friends, that you can take something from it. My dad was an educator, a secondary educator, sort of like me. He was an administrator, a high school principal, and then assistant superintendent. There are a lot of things I could talk about with my dad, but I'm not going to say too much, except that he was a very broken man, a man who was very unhappy, miserable with himself. And yet, on the other side of it, even though he didn't know how to do it correctly, he loved his family, he loved his children. He just didn't know how to be a very good dad. Starting with, he didn't know how to love himself. He was a perfectionist, and that is more of a central part of the story that I want to tell tonight. He demanded perfection from his children. I was the oldest, and I think I really bore the brunt of that. He demanded perfection, he demanded perfection from others, and I think it was a way of somehow hiding from all of the flaws and faults that he saw in himself. He wanted to be proud of us, but he didn't know how to be proud without it being connected to judging, without it being connected to very, very conditional love. And so from a very, very early age, I learned that in order to have my father's love, I could never make mistakes. I could never make him angry. I had to be perfect, at least in worldly terms. And since he was an educator, a lot of that was about being perfect in school. You know, always making 100% on papers and A's and winning the prizes. Thank you. And being just the person that everybody bragged about to him. And then he could feel good about himself as a reflection of what people said about me or my younger brother. But since this is when I was very young, it was mostly on me. My dad was very volatile in terms of anger and giving love and withholding love. I realize now, and I didn't then, of course, that my understanding of God was very, very connected to my view and image and understanding of my earthly father. And I think that's probably true for a lot of people. So maybe just if you struggle with God, that might be part of it. I think that's true for a lot of people. And so I learned very early that the idea that God couldn't possibly love me unconditionally because my earthly father didn't. And if I wasn't perfect, then that love would be withheld. We went to church all the time, my Methodist church. My dad was a Sunday school teacher. My mom was a Sunday school teacher. We went to the Sunday school, the kids' church stuff. And I remember even when I was 4 or 5 years old, when we would sing songs like, Jesus Loves Me. Everybody knows that one. I remember this voice in my head would say, but not you, not you. And I never told anybody that, of course. I didn't understand it. I thought that voice was God's voice, and I was devastated. But I knew I had to be as perfect as I could, so I couldn't tell anybody about that. Later on, after I was confirmed at the age of 12, and I started, just being more intellectually mature and understanding more, and also just being that age when you start to rebel and pull away a little bit and question your parents, I quite quickly became an atheist, intellectually. I thought, you know what, if God doesn't love me and my dad doesn't love me, or at least I can't ever count on it because it's so capricious, so abusive in a way, then to heck with them. I don't need them. I don't want them. It's ridiculous. They can just go straight to the devil. And I was angry, and I felt really superior about it because I thought, gosh, I'm so smart. I just have this all figured out. As I got older through high school and college and my 20s, this really became confirmed in my mind. However, along with that, with all of the demands that I had internalized about perfection, I became more and more and more depressed. And I suffered with that in silence for many, many years. I had a lot of suicidal times when I really just wished I were dead because I could never live up to those expectations. And I thought I was a failure. I thought I was a failure even though I had graduated in the top 10 of 1,000 graduates. I thought I was a failure even though I earned 3 college degrees summa cum laude in 3 years because somebody else maybe got an award that I didn't, and my dad told me how disappointed he was in me. It was just that sort of never can win relationship. After I finished my teaching career in 2008, I felt really lost and lonely and angry and like, what now? What do I do? I don't have a husband. I'd been divorced. I don't have a family. I don't have a lot of money. I'm a failure. I was very suicidal again, but I had a friend named Sheila who was a really, really good Christian, a real Christian, not just said she was. She walked the walk. And I told her about these feelings. I'd never really told anybody this story before. And she said to me, Laura, do you not understand? That voice in your head is not God. It's not even your dad. That voice is the enemy. And he is a trickster and a liar and a deceiver and a really good actor. And he used your dad. Your dad is not the enemy. He is another pitiful victim. And you are not unloved, and God does not hate you or disparage you. And she said, there's a church I want you to go to. And so for some reason, because I trusted her, I went. And I liked it. The very first thing I liked about it was that the preacher, one of the things he said was, the pastor said, that sometimes religion is the absolute opposite of loving and finding God. And he welcomed questions. There was a Wednesday Bible study time, and we sat down for 2 hours the first time I showed up to that afterwards, and I asked him all sorts of difficult, challenging questions about God and religion and theology and so forth. He answered them all. He reaffirmed that it was not God, that voice in my head, that it was the enemy trying very hard to keep me from God. He gave me the compassionate answer that my anger at God, my walking away from God, was a perfectly normal response if indeed that had been true. And since I had thought it was true, it was just a healthy thing to do, to walk away from something that I believed hated me. But he said, you have to understand the truth, and then you will see it in an entirely different light. He also did not judge me or tell me I was wrong, to question, to doubt, to be angry, to challenge God. And I have found that absolutely essential in my journey in faith. If I had to accept everything without ever questioning, without ever doubting, I wouldn't be able to do it. That is not who I am. And one of the things I told him was that I don't want to have to give up my intellect to be a Christian. I don't want to have to be brain dead to be a Christian. And that was one of my fears. And he said, you don't have to be. You just have to have an open heart and an open mind and be able to see things through a different lens than maybe what you're used to. And then it just opened up a whole new world to me. When I left St. Louis, two of the things that I was really, really concerned about leaving. One was my veterinarian, because I had 6 cats at the time, and they are my sweethearts. And I thought, if I can't find a good vet, I'm not moving. And then the other was my church. And I didn't know if I could find a place that I would love. And yet here I am, and I love it, and I think this is really where I was meant to be. One last thing I'd like to say is with the songs that the musicians sang tonight, How Great Thou Art was the song that my dad had requested be sung at his funeral. And one thing I was thinking as I was listening to it tonight was my dad had so many faults and failings and missteps as a father. Even though he wanted to be a good dad, he just didn't know how, and he didn't have the maturity and strength to pull it off. But God doesn't have any of those problems and failings and weaknesses. And how wonderful is that? So I guess this is probably part 1 of my life change, since it only brings me up to a few years ago. But thank you. I'm finished now.